Well, Job chapter 19 today. This is going to be a fun one. So, this is a really poetic chapter in understanding Job's ideas and concepts about the next life. So let's just jump in and get going through this. Some fun things we're going to talk about. Verse 1. Then Job answered and said, "How long will ye vex my soul and break me in pieces with words?" Now, realize he's talking about his friends. He's got his three friends there, and they're not seeing eye to eye on how things work. Go look at the past videos on the other chapters to catch up on that. He says, "These 10 times have ye reproached me. Ye are not ashamed that ye make yourselves strange to me. And be it indeed that I have erred, mine error remaineth with myself." So he's saying in here, basically, that his friends, or the people he thought were his friends, aren't acting so much like his friends anymore. They're they're distancing themselves, as he says in verse 3, "You're not ashamed to make yourselves strange to me." So they're okay showing there's a limit to their friendship. That they're kind of, oh, now you're like weird and sickly and crazy, and we kind of don't. We're gonna keep our distance from you. Don't want to be that much of a friend with you anymore. And he says basically, if I have erred, then that's my mistake. I need to deal with that. Verse 5 says, "If indeed ye will magnify yourselves against me and plead against me my reproach, know now that God hath overthrown me and hath compassed me with his tent." So he's telling them basically that despite what they think, God is the one that is overthrowing him. God is doing something with his life that's really bad, at least from his perspective. And that's what's going on here. He says here, he goes on to into some more discussion or explanation of this idea. He says, verse 7, "Behold, I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry aloud, but there is no judgment. He hath fenced up my way that I cannot pass. He hath set darkness in my path. He hath stripped me of my glory, and taken the crown from my head. He hath destroyed me on every side, and I am gone. And mine hope hath he removed like a tree. He hath also kindled his wrath against me, and he counteth me unto him as one of his enemies. His troops come together and raise up their way against me, and encamp round about my tabernacle. He hath put my brethren far from me, and mine acquaintance are very estranged from me. My kinsfolk have failed, my familiar friends have forgotten me. They that dwell in mine house and my maids count me for a stranger. I am an alien in their sight. I called my servant, and he gave me no answer. I entreated him with my mouth. My breath is strange to my wife, though I entreated for the children's sake of mine own body. Yea, young children despised me. I arose, and they spake against me. All my inward friends abhorred me, and they whom I loved are turned against me. My bone cleaveth to my skin and to my flesh, and I am escaped with the skin of my teeth. So these several verses here is just this long explanation going, look, all kinds of bad stuff are happening to me. It's crazy. God has hedged up the way. He has put his enemies, his troops against me. The visualizations are really wonderful in here, that he has destroyed me on every side. He has removed my hope, stripped me of my glory, taken the crown from my head, fenced up my way, put darkness in front of me. So he's like, I can't see what's coming. I don't know what's happening, but I'm blocked at every aspect. I'm stuck where I'm at, and there's nothing I can do about it. It's funny that he even mentions in here that his servants don't recognize him anymore. They don't want to talk to him and associate with him. His friends have abhorred him. Nobody wants to hang out with him anymore. He's left alone, basically. In fact, it's funny in verse 17, "My breath is strange to my wife." So he's not even around his wife. His wife has kind of abandoned him to an extent, which is, this is an interesting point. And I know this is totally off the subject to an extent. But it kind of begs the question. This is the first time since the beginning of Job we've heard him mention his wife. Now, here's something to think about. And I hadn't thought about this before, but his wife is alive. He lost his wealth. He lost his children. He lost servants. He didn't lose his wife. It reminds me, if you're familiar with Tim Hawkins, the Christian comedian, he has a little commentary joke he talks about with Job. And he says that, the devils are talking with Satan, going, man, you've taken all of his stuff, but you haven't taken his wife. And Satan's standing there going, ha, ha, I know, leave her. Look, I know what I'm doing. Yeah, just, she's gonna be a good one for us. And you're like, what kind of wife does Job have that Satan didn't take her from him? That he left her. His whole job is to make Job's life miserable, and yet he doesn't take Job's wife. I don't know. It was just an interesting commentary that Tim Hawkins brought up. If you ever watch his commentary, you can find it, and he has a lot better comedic timing than I do on those kinds of things. But it's interesting that she's still around, and even she won't talk to him, basically. Pretty interesting. So let's jump in here and let's see, verse 21. Have pity on me, O ye my friends, for the hand of God hath touched me. Why do ye persecute me as God, and are not satisfied with my flesh? Oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book. Well, that's kind of funny because they actually are. Millions of people have been able to read these conversations he had with his friends. Verse 24, that they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. So just pause for a second here. He's still going back and forth with his friends. He's trying to say, guys, why are you judging me and trying to you're taking God's side in a way? Because his friends still think, oh, because you are basically because you have these bad things happening to you, you must have done something sinful. That's that gospel of prosperity we've talked about. In the last chapter, you can see a lot about that. So they're like, what did you do, Job? What did you do to piss off God? And he's like, I didn't do anything to piss off God, but some reason God has decided to do this to me, but I don't know why. And they're like, oh, I don't know if we want to hang out with you anymore because you're wicked, you're evil with God. And he's like, well, thanks for sticking by my side and being my friend. That's kind of the summary of the whole thing here. But from verse 25 on, we see Job's faith, and we see how strong in his faith and his understanding of Jesus Christ that he really is, which is powerful for somebody from the Old Testament time. And it's part of the reason why they think it was somebody later that made up the story of Job that put this in here in the Old Testament, because he talks more in a New Testament style, or he talks more with terms that we're not super familiar with from Old Testament times, basically. But he says again in verse 25, for I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. Now for LDS, we look at that and go, okay, to know your Redeemer liveth, you know who Christ is, you know what he has done for you, and that he will be on the earth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. That's not his first time on earth. That's his second time, his second coming that he's referencing there. At least that's how LDS philosophy would interpret that verse. Now verse 26, and though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God. That's dealing with resurrection. He will have a resurrected body and see God again. That's the kind of faith that Job has, that he has such a sure understanding of the next life, of who he is and where he is going and what his life is about, that regardless of what happens to him in his life, he knows the next life is the more important part of it. Such a fascinating concept, or this idea, if we judge spiritual things by worldly measures, we'll never understand spiritual things. Spiritual things must be understood from spiritual perspectives. That's what he's taking, is this longer eternal perspective on his life. He's not so worried about, I know the mortal life, eventually I'm going to die, eventually it's all going to end, and I will be resurrected at some point and be with God again. And that's what his hope is in the future, what he's looking forward to. Interesting thing about verse 26 as well is verse 26 is translated different in Jewish scripture. So I want to talk about this. Messerly, in his report, Yet Will I Trust Him, about Job, for BYU, talk about this. He says, we might note parenthetically that the great testimony of Job in chapter 19, verse 26, has been interpreted in two ways. Quote, Yet in my flesh shall I see God. That's the King James Version. And then without my flesh shall I see God. That's actually the Jewish Publication Society version of it. He says the first of these implies the literal resurrection, the other does not. The Hebrew text says, from my flesh, and this can be interpreted in either sense. The same ambiguity applies to English usage. If I say, from the house I saw him coming, I could have been inside the house or just outside the house when I saw him coming. Thus, one's theology determines how one translates this passage. Latter-day Saints do not depend on this passage to establish their belief in the literal resurrection, but point to it as one more glorious affirmation of it. So realizing that from a Latter-day Saint perspective, we don't hinge our whole idea of resurrection on this statement from Job, because there isn't, when it comes to understanding resurrection, there isn't a lot that's there. King David talks about it. Some of the other great prophets talk about it. It is mentioned a little bit in the New Testament after the Savior was resurrected and things, but there's just not a ton there about resurrection, not as much as what the LDS Church has with the Book of Mormon and teachings from Joseph Smith and Doctrine and Covenants and things as well. So for LDS, we'll see verse 26 as one more thing to reinforce that there is a resurrection. It's a literal event that will happen in the future. Whereas other people might say, well, we're not sure if we can interpret it that way, because of the Hebrew could have gone either direction. Maybe he'll see God without his body, meaning in the spirit world. Maybe he'll see God with his body after resurrection. In the grander scheme of understanding the plan of salvation, it makes more sense, especially for an LDS philosophy, to see that as a resurrection rather than spirit world. Because we know in the spirit world we're still being tested. There's still a challenge and test going on, so it would be inappropriate to have God revealed to you in the spirit world while you're still being tested, basically. Hence why we do baptisms for the dead and everything else. So just a little information as we're learning and understanding the scriptures better to help you understand this chapter of Job a little bit more. Now, verse 27, whom shall I see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me? But ye should say, why persecute we him, seeing the root of the matter is found in me? Be ye afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth the punishments of the sword, that ye may know there is a judgment. So he just kind of reinforces that he knows in the resurrection, he knows he'll see God, he'll be with God. Again, Job has this really great understanding of the plan of salvation and the gospel. And that's wonderful. That gives him hope. That helps him know this life isn't the end. There's more to come. And that's a wonderful thing for Job to understand. That he's trying to convey to his friends that there is a resurrection. There will be a day of judgment. There will be these reckonings. And he's doing his best to make sure that he is good with God. Even though he's being punished, or what it feels like being punished, and he doesn't know why, he's still doing his best to be right with God so that he can live with God once again. So a great idea for us to think about in our lives. What does that mean for our life when we have hard times? Can we still have that faith of Job? Can we still believe in God even though we feel like God is punishing us or giving us these huge challenges in our life? That's really what Job is talking about and what's going on in his life. So let's jump over to chapter 20 to learn more.